Thank you all for joining us this morning. We have Adrian Turner here from HR Assured, who's going to be presenting on the safety system and how things work and all the different nuances about it. Adrian, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ernie. So I thought I'd spend today giving a sort of a brief overview about what a safety system is and how the MPAQ Safety platform can allow you to manage your safety requirements through it. And then I've got Billiana Stevens from our team who's going to help me sort of demonstrate the primary function of the safety software that we've got, being the SWMS tool. So I think, just as a bit of background, the primary reason that we wanted to develop a SWMS generation tool is because it's not businesses that have or organizations that have what's a sort of a template SWMS that's been provided or drafted to sort of apply to a range of circumstances and just sort of changing the date on the top, is often actually non-compliant. And so in circumstances where it is obviously the easiest thing to provide a regulator, say if a regulator came and did an inspection, or if you had an incident on site and you needed to show them your SWMS, or if you needed to even provide your SWMS to a contractor, a template SWMS doesn't always, and in most cases wouldn't, be compliant with the legislation, which means, you know, it doesn't actually achieve the purpose that it's in place for. And so what we wanted to do with this SWMS tool is have a really quick, because everyone is short on time, quick but compliant process in which you can generate SWMS and be confident that they are compliant with what your obligations are under the Work Health Safety Act. So I'll leave sort of the SWMS component for a moment. When sorry, I can just see a question. Perhaps I take that. Was that you, Ernie, or
that was me? Sorry, Adrian. We just didn't have vision for a little while, but it's rectified now.
That's okay. All good. And so this, what you're seeing on the screen here, is what I would consider sort of a broader work health safety system. So a SWMS is one component of what a work health safety system is, and what you're required to have under work health safety laws is a system for managing the primary duty of care that all businesses have for employees, and the hazards and risks that come up in the workplace. Then what a SWMS is below that is, a SWMS is essentially a risk assessment, but it's a risk assessment that's required, specifically called out in the legislation, to manage what are high-risk construction activities. And the legislation says that the SWMS, you must have a SWMS in place to manage the defined work health safety, high-risk construction activities. And so our SWMS, and again, I'll get to that in a moment, but our SWMS tool is about the absolute basics. What do you need to comply? And that is identifying what the high-risk construction activities are in the plumbing space and automatically populating them with control measures to control those high-risk construction activities without making the SWMS overly complex and with too much information that makes it unwieldy and often impractical, and not something that plumbing outfits can actually follow in practice. And so, in addition to the SWMS generation tool, there are a range of other functions that you have access to via this platform, and you can see them all largely on your screen there. And they through the SWMS generation tool and through the other functionalities in the system, you can use this to comply with all of your obligations. It can be overwhelming, I think, for small businesses, and that's across any industry, but certainly in the plumbing space, where often we're businesses under 5 employees, it can seem like a lot, because technically all of the things that are in this platform here go to what your compliance obligations are under the Work Health Safety Act. But we do want to focus on the things that are of primary importance and which keep your people safe, but also allow you to be confident that you're actually compliant with your obligations. And so there's a couple of functionalities that I just point out in here that you've got access to, which are great record keeping tools, if nothing else. And that if you're not using them already, you might like to think about shifting all of your work health safety documentation and matter management into this cloud platform, because what the work health safety regulator is concerned with is keeping people safe primarily, and the way that they consider and that they consider that people that are kept safe at work is through compliance with the Work Health Safety Act. And when they investigate businesses for not compliance, if a plumber falls off the roof and the inspector from WorkSafe comes and inspects you, they will be interrogating the extent to which you've complied with a range of obligations. Now, primarily, the SWMS and the other elements of your work health safety system are what will allow you to be in a position to defend that, or to provide to WorkSafe to say, well, hang on, we shouldn't be held responsible, or the liability is limited because look at the things we had in place to be controlling that. Primarily, it's your SWMS. So if you can at all times be confident that for work that the plumbers are working on, there is a SWMS in place for that activity, and that is a compliant SWMS, then you're halfway there. I think because it is the most practical way of identifying all the key risks and hazards that you're that are going to come up on the job. And so, but then also there's going to be other things that you get asked for, and the only way you can table them to the regulator or the inspector that comes out to your business is to have a record of them. What did I have in place? What did we do in relation to that? Did we have a system in place? So you can use the various aspects of this system as a record keeping functionality. I would say most, probably the most useful document or functionality in the system is the WHS manual template. And what this is a giant manual for work health safety management. And within that document, that sets out what a system is. And many of you might have used that already or provided it to, a contractor or through a tender to demonstrate, hey, we do have work health safety things in place, and these are all our policies and procedures that govern how we approach health and safety in the business. And that's how you access that manual, is through our WHS, MPAQ WHS templates just there. And so it is a paper-based document. And you'll see here, this is the type of thing that you get asked for. It looks, because it is quite extensive and difficult to wrap your head around how you would follow all of this in practice. But unfortunately, it's one of those things that just is the way it is for a lot of, certainly for major contractors, and in tender requirements will ask you, where's your work health safety system, or where's your work health safety manual or handbook? Can we inspect it? Now, this applies to this can be used, I should say, for any business, basically inserting the company name into the business. And ultimately, yes, you need to be hopefully applying this document in practice rather than just letting it gather dust. But this is a work health safety system. And then as this relates to the cloud platform, you can then put various things in the cloud platform as records of your work health safety compliance. So things like consultations, one of the core elements of the Work Health Safety Act, and that always gets asked from inspectors when they're investigating an incident or when they're just doing a random spot check, is how are you consulting with your workers about work health safety matters? Because it's a primary obligation under the Act. Basically, anything you put in place for health and safety, you're supposed to talk to your workers about it. Toolbox talks are usually the most effective way to do it, and it can be nothing more than, what's the job that we're doing today? What's our SWMS? What do we need to be careful of in the job? That's a toolbox talk, and you can record that using this functionality. And then right there, if you continue to do that for as many consultations as you can, you build up, I guess, a body of evidence to demonstrate that you do have a health and safety system in place. You might like to use in the document that I just showed you, the WHS manual, there is a format for recording toolbox talks, and you can upload that document into the consultation tab here, and that is your record of consultation. The same goes for hazards and risks. So certainly within the manual, but also within this platform, there is a way in which you can record hazards and risks so that they sit there. Again, if you think about it through the lens of it's essentially a repository for information and a record keeping tool that you can draw on in the event you have to demonstrate what are you doing in respect of work health and safety. So we'll get to the SWMS in a second. Again, that's the primary reason that I'd be using this platform, and it's the most practical thing to do for health and safety. And once you generate a SWMS in the system, it will always be there as a record. But equally, if you can use this risk register to input risks into again have ready on hand to demonstrate that how the business is managing a particular area of risk, again, because it just puts you in a more defensible position in the event that there's some incident that occurs and you need to be able to try and demonstrate the system that you had to avoid serious liability for a lot of these things, and you can use the functionality rather than a strictly paper-based system where records get lost. They're not sort of maintained with much regularity, whereas as soon as you put something in this platform, it stays there. You can draw on it whenever you need. The same goes for incidents. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. You can set up employees in your business with employee self-service, which means that everyone can have this platform on their phone. And if they want to, if an incident occurs, they can log the incident and make the business aware of the incident through the platform. You can also use this as a really more of an administrator only type system. And that, what I mean by that is that, say that there's a business, but there's one person responsible for management of records and workplace health and safety, etc. And only that person would log the incidents in the system, again, because you're required to keep records of it. And so it may be that you use the incident report in the work health safety manual that I just showed you and that's how the employees would raise an incident with the business, but then the business plugs that information into the system to keep a record of it, because again, that's what's required. And the beauty of it is that it is intended to be a guided flow, so that by the end of you putting information into this system, you've got an understanding of what needs to happen as a result of it. And in addition to that, I'd encourage anyone, there is an ability to ring the MPAQ Safety advice line, which comes through to me to help you assess things like that. So say you had an incident in the workplace, you didn't know what to do about it, you could know that you'd straight away make sure that you log the incident in your HRA, in your MPAQ Safety platform. But then if you're wondering, well, how serious is this incident? What do I need to do about it? Then that's what our advisory line and support is for. And I could take you through and ask you a range of questions to try and identify, hey, is this a serious enough incident? Do I need to report it to WorkSafe? What happens if I don't, etc. And so it's meant to be through the advisory line and the platform that we're providing you access to. You've just got more support to make sure that you're complying with your obligations, which are unfortunately extremely extensive and are applicable to all businesses regardless of size. But I will say that I think the difficulty with all safety management is that you really often don't know you have an issue with it, or you will not have an issue with safety until you do. And what I mean by that is that there's very few, if you don't put a lot of these things in place and you don't regularly create SWMS, and you don't have a WHS manual in place, you don't register incidents, you don't do toolbox talks, those types of things, nothing necessarily happens, unless you need to provide your SWMS to contractors because that's a requirement. If you're doing your own work on site, and there's never been a requirement to table SWMS and things of that nature, so that you're not really doing anything with health and safety. You just don't know that nothing happens. There's not a no one necessarily finds out about that. But if there is an injury and someone gets injured at work, which ironically would hopefully have been prevented if you were doing those things. But once you have that incident, the exact things that you're supposed to have in place that we're talking about today, the things that WorkSafe interrogate and ask you about. And so you can often avoid any liability, even when there is an injury at work, by having really basic things in place to say, well, there was an injury, but we did all things reasonably practical to have avoided it. Because look, the high-risk construction activities that were involved in this job were identified in the SWMS, and we had the control measures in place, which were X, Y, and Z. This just happened to happen as a bit of a freak accident in spite of those things that we had in place. And what would happen there is that you would be investigated, and if you had the basics in place, you would avoid liability, and it's just you sort of move on. But if you don't have any of those things in place, then it becomes quite a harsh regime on businesses and individuals who say that you weren't taking safety seriously, someone's been injured as a result, and they've got a fairly punitive fine and penalty regime to draw on. So I just wanted to spend some time going through that aspect and I guess the bigger picture in respect to health and safety and the different functionalities that you have in this platform before myself and Biljana take you through, I guess, the SWMS generation process. And I will just stress again, I'll throw it open to any questions after this, but really creating the SWMS is the most important thing that you can do. If you can do nothing else with respect to health and safety, but ensure that either through this system or otherwise you are creating SWMS on a per job basis, that is the most important thing, because we need to be, understand that we're not going to be able to do everything with health and safety. There's 1,000,001 things that a business needs to do to do well. But one of the sort of the non-negotiable is the SWMS. And if you always are ensuring that that you have your SWMS in place for each job, you're going to go a long ways to making sure that no one gets injured, so you're never really going to have a problem. But even when they do, you can only have very minimal liability because you've got the basics in place to be able to demonstrate, hey, we did all things reasonably practical, which is the standard that you're held to under the legislation. So just before I move on, I asked Biljana to share her screen and I sort of walk you through it. Was there any questions regarding that? I know that I've sort of covered a lot of ground there very quickly, but did anyone have any questions? So, Biljana, did you want to share your screen and we can?
Absolutely. Thanks, Adrian. I'll just share my screen. Won't be a moment. So members of MPAQ will all get access to the system. And when they first log into the system, what they're actually looking at is a version of what we call an employee management tool. And the employee management tool is required to be able to then access, as Adrian mentioned earlier, self-service, and to be able to load your employees in there to be able to communicate with them the SWMS documents and other WHS requirements. So one of the first steps, so as a user, your name will appear in the top right-hand corner. But the first step is really to create an employee record. Okay, so and when you log in under this tab that says employees, there's a button that says add employee. And you simply fill in the details. fields to create address details, contact information, and we do need to add in an email address, because an email address is what will identify this employee to be able to register for self-service. So you can add some position titles, an employee ID number, and click create. Once I have my employee in the system, and in particular, I have an email address, I can then invite them to register for self-service. And the way you invite them is by sharing a link that's stored in the system. When we go onto the settings area and go to account settings, there is a tab called commercial. And under an add-ons tab, you'll see a box that says self-service. Here it says, in order for your users to register for self-service, you need to ensure that you've got an email address associated with their record. And then you can share the following link with your users and allow them to register for their own self-service account. So when they click this link, it's asking them to register to the account using their email address. When you click the register button, it's going to recognize them, that they are an employee of this account. And then you can confirm the registration. It'll send them an authentication email to their email address, from which they can then set their secure password. So once an employee is registered for self-service, and you have all your employees listed here, you can then go to your WHS system and create a SWMS. So when I click the SWMS create a red button, it's given me a create SWMS option, as well as resuming a SWMS that I may have started previously. So I want to create a new one. It opens up a little form like this where I need to then click the create button again. And click create new document. And the process starts where it takes me through what's called a question and answer process to fill in all those variable fields to create that SWMS document. Yeah, so the first question, yeah, go on, Adrian.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think from here, once you're in the actual questionnaire, you'll just be asked a series of questions that are either through free text fields or through yes or no will populate the end result SWMS that you develop, and that once you have finished this questionnaire, you'll be, what will be provided to you is a SWMS document that you can either send out to employees through the system or print off and have them sign as you would sort of a typical SWMS. And your progress and the responses through the process are all going to be displayed on that left-hand side here, so that if you want to go back to any of those areas, you can. And I think just so everyone's clear on the process and why we've set it up this way, the requirements, the only things that you need to identify by law in the SWMS is the identification of the high-risk construction activities and the hazards and risks associated with them, and the controls that are put in place to control those risks. So how we've set up this process is that, yes, as Billiana's doing at the moment, you set up just the very basic information about that job, the contractor, etc. But then you simply identify, are any of these high risk work licenses required on this job? yes or no, and you ask specific questions in relation to each one. And then it will ask you to identify the high-risk construction activities if they are to be applicable on that job, and if associated hazards are applicable to those high-risk construction activities through yes or no answers, and all of the controls will automatically populate from there. So it should just be a matter of having an understanding of the nature of the job and the hazards associated with that job, and it will guide you through as Biljana's working through. So here, will any high-risk work license be required for this job? I think click yes on this one, Biljana.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Back
Yes.
to the very first question on the other end of the phone, I quite often get for the very first question, is that the members' details or the company that they're doing the job for? So the very first question about the principal contractor, is that their details or who they're doing the work for?
It will, well, in some cases, it might not even be the person you're doing the work for, but because of the, I guess, the contracting model. But in most cases, I would imagine that you're not the principal contractor. You're doing work for the principal contractor. But in some cases, you're subbing for a company that isn't the actual principal contractor for that job. So if in doubt, it's unlikely that you're the principal contractor if you don't already know that you are. So I would select no for that. But it would be a matter of then asking the person that you're doing the work for if they're the principal contractor, and when they can provide you that answer. But I would suggest that that's in a lot of cases going to be no.
But Adrian, if I'm Ernie doing a job for Mrs. Smith and getting on the roof or something like that, I would be the principal contractor.
Correct. If it's just a like a resi job like that, you would be a principal contractor. But if you're in a broader process where you're a subby working on a bigger job, then no, you're very unlikely to be.
Thanks.
If there's any, yeah, I'm definitely encourage if there's any question as to that when you're developing the SWMS, definitely call the safety line and we can give you some advice on that.
Thanks.
So equally here, if you've selected yes to high risk work licenses, you'll need to go through and identify which of those they are. So it's not a huge issue either way which ones you select here, just for the purpose of the example, Biljana. So just work through these.
Adrian, David asked, how do we know what is high risk work?
They will, the only high risk work activities that there are specifically on that WorkSafe stipulates on the website and it's in the legislation are the exact questions that are in this format. So if they're not questions, if it hasn't asked you a question about whether, which we'll get to in a second, whether is this high risk construction activity on this job, it's not a high risk construction activity. And so I think that's it sort of goes to the heart of, I guess, what we ultimately were trying to solve for members is that SWMS, the only thing that need to be in a SWMS is the management of high risk construction activities. That's what the legislation says, but often SWMS have become a much broader tool and more of a generalized risk assessment, which means often, and they're done on a kind of activity basis as opposed to site basis. And so often a business will have to go through and, have 6 SWMS for one particular job because the high risk construction activities are split over the 6 different template SWMS. So given the legislation sets that, and that's what you'd be asked by the regulator, this tool is directed at just the absolute requirements in the simplest way possible from the legislation. So yes, you can select yes to PPE. Select yes to all these.
David did add a follow-up. He said he would suggest jetting is not a high-risk construction activity, but a maintenance activity. Is it possible to have a SWMS that covers all of this work rather than a per-job basis?
Is it possible to is it a specific jetting SWMS? Yes, it is. I think if it is within the questionnaire around high-risk construction activities, then it is in the legislation, and therefore you do need to have it is a high-risk construction activity. Whether it's kind of intuitively and practically whether it is or not, I'm not as sure. But if it is in the legislation, it's within the SWMS, and so you do need to identify it. Can you have a jetting specific SWMS? Absolutely, you can do that. That's probably something that we need to create as kind of a separate document that you have ready if that's a particular type of work that you're doing all the time and you only want to cover that type of work. Yes, we could do that as opposed to using the SWMS creator tool. So you can click yes to that. Sorry, there's just a question there for a second, Biljana. I didn't think it was. Where do we find the tab to add an employee to the self-service?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you quite then, Adrian. There was background noise.
Where you might not be able to go back just at this very moment, but where do members find a tab to add an employee to the self-service?
They need to go to the employee management module here and add the employee record first, and then invite them to register for self-service. Are you saying where do they go to find whether they have actually registered for self-service? Where would they be listed?
I think that's the question, yes. How do we then invite them after creating an employee?
Yeah. So that's just, I have to go out of this system though. Which
okay, why don't we'll take that one, we'll come back.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
No
yeah, definitely. So would we
this
like
is
to
a good one. So again, this doesn't go to high risk construction activities, but rather sort of the general arrangements for work health safety on site, which is commonplace to be on a SWMS and that you would be familiar with when you see a general SWMS for anything. And so whilst it's not required to have it on the SWMS, it's a good thing to have on there just to cover off on it in any event. And so I would, in nearly all cases, select yes to that. There's really no reason not to have it on there. Again, this is a recent addition because I understand there are some contractors who require a risk matrix to be on the SWMS. Again, it's not something the legislation requires, but I think it is one of the sort of the stipulations that a lot of major contractors want to see when they're signing off on your SWMS. So there's no harm in including that in all cases as well. And so how do we want to distribute the SWMS to the workforce? So Biljana, do you want to cover off on this one? There's 3 different options there.
That's right. So the distribute to employees via self-service I'll demonstrate how that works, and it's through a messaging tool that we have called self-service messaging. Then there's also print and have employees physically sign. And you can also insert an electronic signature. So if you're creating it here in the tool and on your desktop, you could actually just sign it off as well. So let's use the first option for this example to distribute to employees via self-service. Okay, now it takes us to the document creation, the finalization page, and this allows you to review all the questions and answers that you've submitted as part of this document creation, and it gives you also the option to be able to edit anything you need to change. So if we're happy with all the questions and answers, then we click Next to create the document. I can just navigate back to the WHS module over here on the left-hand side. And you can see here is the SWMS that I've just created, and the user will be the author. So I'm logged in as Tim Traps on this account, and that's the author of this SWMS. Okay, so now there was the question obviously about employees, and I showed you earlier how to add the employee. You invite them to register for self-service, but where you can go to see who actually has self-service access and who hasn't is under settings, under usernames and passwords. You'll see a tab that says users. The users tab is where management users of the system and where their credentials will sit. So usually the member of Master Plumbers Association will be the main user. And then next to the users tab, you'll see another tab called ESS users. So ESS users is where you can see who has registered for self-service. So these are all active ESS users. If you want to run a report, you can also go to reporting, go down to self-service, click self-service users, and you can generate a report. Okay, so this plumber number 5, who we just added today, has been sent the registration link, but they still need to log in. They still need to set up a password and log in for the first time because they've not made any login attempts. And here you'll see all your other users who do have access. And there is a column that says has self-service access to easily identify them. So once you have your users and you want to share this SWMS with them in self-service, I saw another question pop up in the chat. Is there a phone app for employees to be able to create the SWMS on their device? No, there's no phone app. It is via a browser. So it tends to be over the phone. It obviously depends on how big your screen is, but you can certainly go through the SWMS questions to create. They can certainly create it over the phone, but what they'll need is actual access as a manager user, not just a self-service user. So self-service users are employees who you're sharing a SWMS document with. Okay. If you need someone to create a SWMS, then you'll need to go to the settings area, click usernames and passwords, select one of your employees via the ESS area. You need to click edit and you untick self-service only, click update. That will then move them over to this tab. And you'll then need to proceed to give them, to make sure they've got access, in particular to the SWMS register tab, as well as a few other permissions. Pretty much anything that says MPAQ SWMS should be ticked against their user profile, as well as employee management, and click update. So now when this employee logs in, they will then see this area of the system because they need to be able to access this button to create it. However, if you want to create the SWMS here and then share it with an employee. Then you click the actions area, click self-service messaging, click create a message. You can share it to everyone within the organization or by users specifically. You can also create an acknowledgement button so you can have recorded evidence that they have received that document and acknowledged it. Then you go to the attached document. Highlight it in grey, go back to message details and click send. That message now has been sent and the employee will receive a notification. And they'll also then they'll be notified to log in to self-service. And when they log in, they'll see on the notice board the new SWMS, the attachment for the document, which they can open. And they can read and they can acknowledge that. And this acknowledgement will then also send a note against their employee record to say that they've done so. So that's how we that's how the self-service portal can be activated, and that's how you can also share it via self-service with them. If I go back to self-service, I'll also show you there is the safety tab that they can access. And under the SWMS register, any documents that are created and shared will be visible to them here. And also, if they wanted to lodge an incident, they can do so through self-service as well. They can click Add a New Incident button and fill in the form. And they can also, that will also create an incident record within the management system. In addition to incidents, we also have the hazard form as well that they can also lodge. So this self-service area is quite mobile friendly, even though it is browser based because we don't have an app. It is very mobile friendly and does work very well on any mobile device. However, this area, the SWMS Creator will still work on a mobile device quite effectively. However, there is a lot of information on here. And they will have to scroll to be able to get through the process of creating a SWMS, but it's just done via a browser.
Juliana, I'll just jump in quickly. I got a conceived question that is a little bit technical. It's from Dave. Sure. If I'm doing insurance work and quoting and invoicing the insurance company, brackets Bob's insurance work, but I'm obviously only doing the plumbing work, am I the principal contractor or is Bob's insurance works? The answer is, unfortunately, it's a very legal term that lawyers love. It depends. And what it depends on is if the insurance company is commissioning building or construction work. And so if you're and if you have control or management authority for that site. So in some instances that the insurance company might be the principal contractor who is allocating work and has principal control of that construction site and is subbing it out. They would be the principal contractor. But if you're doing work and it's an insurance arrangement and you turn up and you're the only work that's going on that site and you've been commissioned directly, then you know, you would probably be the principal contractor, but it also wouldn't necessarily matter because it doesn't meet the works going on there doesn't meet the threshold definition under the legislation, and so you don't have the same type of liability that you would if you're a principal contractor in normal circumstances. So in some respects, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, if those types of situations are arising and it's becoming something that a business wants to query each time, I'm more than happy to answer those questions directly over the advisory line when you're making your SWMS. I thought I saw Ernie's hand go up there. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ernie?
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to add. I think you answered it well, though, Adrian. I was just going to say it depends on who you're contracting to as well. So if you're contracting directly to the insurance company, as in you're giving them the bill and they're paying you, you would be the principal contractor. Whereas if the insurance company has hired a builder and you're going to contract to the builder, then the builder's the principal contractor.
That's spot on. Yeah.
Okay, and I just want to mention that I see Tony's also about where you find employees. I just want to reiterate where the employee area sits, because we have the WHS area where the SWMS creator sits, but over on the left-hand navigation area, you'll see employees. So they first need to be added in as employee records, and then you invite them to register for self-service. And the registration for self-service is just under account settings, and it's via sharing a link under commercial add-ons, and you see a link here. You can email that to them. They can click, and that, provided they use the same email address that you also have on their employee record, the registration should go through without a hitch.
Can you also do that in a different way, like go into the person's record, and then over on the right you've got more actions and it says send invitation? Is that the same, or will that not send a link?
It doesn't send a link. The invitation is just literally a calendar invitation that creates like a calendar file. Okay. Yeah, so it's got nothing to do with registration for ESS. Okay. Yeah,
thanks.
That's okay.
I think the other thing, and it's sort of separate from the system, is often with respect to workplace health and safety, that a lot of the questions that come through the advisory line are, I've got to go through a contractor management process, or I'm working with this contractor and they've asked all these questions about health and safety. What do we have in relation to this, or how can I answer this question? Usually those types of things are addressed through getting a workplace health and safety manual set up, which is using that tab there, MPAQ Safety WHS templates. But if you have specific questions, or you're in a specific process that you might like some sort of guided assistance in about how do I get through this process, I'm more than, I definitely encourage you to call the safety line, which you've got access to, and I can answer those direct questions and sort of try and walk you through it and say, oh, well, that policy and procedure that they've asked for, you can find that in this spot, and I'll email it to you. To just help you get through that, because often they are quite laborious processes for small businesses to go through, and a lot of the time you don't even know what the question is, let alone where to find the answer to it. So if you do need any assistance there, I'm more than happy to be in here for you and give you some advice.
Another regular question.
Sorry. Yep, shoot. I'll might ask Billianda to help Aaron after this one.
Okay. Another regular question is, someone's already got an existing full workplace health and safety management system, and that's due for renewal, and they want to know, is this the same thing?
Yes, it is. So usually the more practical and straightforward thing to do is renew or update the current arrangements that are in place by usually like doing a review and trying to fill in the gaps that you might have had identified by a contractor or by yourself. But in some instances, you might want to migrate and adopt a new one. it just depends on what the need is. So, you know, if you're going through a contractor management process or anything like that, often you'll get rejected. An older form of a workplace health and safety manual or system will get rejected, and so you know, it can be easier to say, okay, well, we're going to adopt a new one, which is the WHS manual. So I think the answer to your question is yes, it is the same thing. It's a WHS system or a WHS manual is the overarching sort of governing system for how you do work health safety. So it's one or the other. The other option, I guess, is to sort of shoehorn in some of the policies and procedures that are in the WHS manual that you've got access to here into your existing one, if that is quicker as well. But that's the type of thing too. If you've got a specific question, hey, I've got this old system, someone's asking me for X, Y, and Z policy and procedure. I don't have it. What's the quickest way to kind of get to where I need to get? I can give you some bespoke advice on that as well.
Great. Now I see also a question from admin. It's a guest. Is it easy to add a created SWMS to a customer file in a program like Fergus? So I guess any SWMS that's created under the SWMS register, they sit as files here that you can click on. They can be downloaded, and that will download onto your browser or into your download folder on your PC, and you can then upload that, and it'll download as a PDF. Okay. If you want to download as a Word document, there is that option there, but I would actually suggest to just download it as a PDF, and then you can share it. I hope that answers your question. And then Aaron also asked about the training section. So this is an area of the system where you open up an employee file and you'll see a training tab. The system allows you to add any created files or competencies against an employee file. But first you need to create those competencies within the system before you can add them. So there are two ways you can do that. If you add a competency, you can set up a new competency from here, or you can go to the settings area, click training and qualifications, and you can start inputting competency data here. Once you've added all your competencies, you can group them. You can also create roles. There might be specific competencies that are related to, gas fitters, or different competencies that are related to, maintenance plumbers. You can create those roles and assign those roles to employees. And self-service allows, and if they've got access to self-service, the employee can actually update that competency themselves. So they can upload certificates, they can upload dates of when it's due to, when it was issued, when it's due to expire. So it is a tool, it's a legacy tool that you guys have inherited as part of the employee management module with our system. And it's available to you, and you're more than welcome to use it. Okay, so Aaron, I hope that answers your question. And then we have another question from Jackie. Is there a list you can generate or log which employees are inducted to what site, and a list of high-risk activities that can be added on a platform instead of looking it up on WorkSafe? So there are, in WHS, under Engage on Safety, there are checklists that you can use. We have contractor WHS inductions and also worker WHS induction workflows. And when you click the workflow, you can assign it to an employee. So if you initiate it, click an employee record. And you can go through the steps to run an induction. However, it does require the setup of some documentation first to be able to upload that information and the documents here.
I think and I'll just come back to that one in a sec. I think in respect to the second one, in terms of a list of the high risk activities that can be added on the platform, yes, probably the most appropriate place to put that, if you had you wanted a list of the actual high risk activities, high risk construction work activities that are going to be applicable to yourself and your business that you're always going to be needing to refer to, I would put them in the risk register. So if you click risk register and add a risk register item, you would add it through this tool, and it would sit there in a risk register that you can draw on to say, well, this is a high risk construction activity. This is how we manage it in our business, and through our SWMS, and these are the controls we put in place, and it therefore gets reduced down to an acceptable risk. I think so. Yeah, I mean, again, it's helpful to put that in there because it's an internal reference point. You know that you know that the risks are being managed appropriately and through your SWMS. But yeah, I would, I typically do. I actually myself refer to the WorkSafe website in a lot of instances as well, and particularly things like codes of practice, because it's from the horse's mouth. If the regulator is saying, usually through a code of practice or somewhere on their website, this is the activity, this is what the standard is for controlling that, that's what you need to do, and that's how the SWMS. That's exactly how the information that is in your SWMS that get generated are from those types of sources, so you can rely on it. But yeah, I do appreciate a lot of the time it's nice to just go into your own system and identify those things, but certainly WorkSafe and codes of practice are the kind of the principal sources. Then in terms of being, inductions, I think it can be a little bit different because a lot of the time some of your workers might be getting inducted onto the principal contractors or another contractor's system, and so the log necessarily might need to, if you're wanting to keep a log as to who's inducted on which type of system, you could find a place to put that in here. You could either put in a document manually and upload it, maybe in consultation, but there's probably not a log as you describe in that particular question. I'm not sure if that answers it, or if you want to provide more detail about that question. It's a little bit complicated. I've just seen another one come through from Anna.
Yes, the question is if
the answer is technically yes, you do. But if it's the same job, if it's exactly the same, if it's, for all intents and purposes, in respect of high risk construction activities, you can just create or edit it in Word to be applicable to the specific jobs. So you might create one, and then if you understand that it's essentially the same high risk construction activities that are applicable, the same high risk work licenses, then you can use that same SWMS, albeit just adjust the details at the top, either in Word when you download it, or by adjusting the actual SWMS that you created. But technically, you do need to. That's what the legislation requires. Look, whether or not in practice, say you only did one, and you were using that SWMS at 3 separate jobs, it's probably, but in practice, the controls that you've got in place actually do keep people safe. You're unlikely to have an injury, and therefore you're unlikely to be penalised for it. But then also you could raise an argument to say, well, the exact same SWMS is applicable across all 3. We made a decision to use the same content of it, and it's part of an overarching safety system that we've got in place, and that's kind of the argument. But to be honest, to be absolutely sure that you comply, and unfortunately, it is one of the things that the legislation requires, that a separate SWMS for each job, which is frustrating, I can imagine. Hey, I'm not sure if there was any other questions or anything from Ernie.
I think we've started to run out of time, but if people do have any additional questions, we can. Aaron's just shot one through. If you want to handle that one quickly, Adrian, but any additional questions, if people want to shoot through an email either to myself or info, and we can have those answered.
That's a good question. It's an important point. Technically, no. So technically, you don't need a SWMS, specifically a SWMS, in order to, if there's no high-risk construction activities to be performed. However, that doesn't mean that you don't still have all of your other obligations under the Work Health Safety Act. And so, you know, a SWMS is a really good way, yes, to address the practical, what are the things that can hurt my people the most, and it's required for high-risk construction activities. And so you may as well use it as the document that applies to as a broader risk management tool. And that's why we've got those questions in there around the general WHS arrangements and the general site hazards and risks that are typically applicable across all work sites. But strictly speaking, no, you don't need a SWMS. But to put that into practice, if you didn't have anything in place, if someone got injured and it wasn't through a high-risk construction activity, it was just some other thing, if you had absolutely nothing in place, or you hadn't done a risk assessment or any other type of WHS arrangement in place for that work site, you would still be at risk of liability and getting in trouble for that, because what the questions they would ask wouldn't be about a SWMS, because they would, if there was no high construction activity, they'd say, okay, well, you don't need a SWMS, but you still were required by law to manage the hazards and risks of that work site so far as reasonably practical. It just so happens that the SWMS format is a great way to kind of solve all your problems in one, because you've still got those overarching hazards and risk management obligations, but you usually do that through the SWMS rather than having a SWMS and then having another risk assessment and a take 5 and a whatever, when usually all the main risks can be covered off in the one SWMS document. So for me, it's about, like, practically speaking, it's just unreasonable to think businesses are going to, especially small businesses, are going to be able to have all these different types of documents applicable to one job, which might last an hour, or one day's job to do all these things. So if you're required to have a SWMS, or otherwise it's actually just the neatest and quickest thing to develop for that job site, it's usually just the quickest way to kill all your birds with one stone. But you know, strictly speaking, if there is no high-risk construction activities being performed, you don't need a SWMS under legislation, but you've still got your other obligations that you need to deal with.
And I'll just add to that, once you get used to the system, creating a SWMS takes minutes. It doesn't take a long time from start to finish. Once you're used to it, and it doesn't take long to get used to it. So I encourage everyone to get in and play around. You won't, and Billiana, back me up on this, you won't break anything.
No,
you can go in and click buttons and play around and get used to it. It doesn't take a lot to get used to it. It's reasonably clear and easy to use. It's nothing onerous or scary once you get your feet wet.
And
but I would
also,
like to. Oh, sorry,
just quickly, Ernie. Also, if you do actually create the SWMS, you can't then delete it. That's correct, isn't it? If you still want to add or edit it, you just save it as a draft. But once you've actually saved it, you can't then delete it. Is that correct?
The document can be deleted. So if I click on this,
it can be edited as well, can't it?
You can
I knew it
change
could be
back
edited,
to draft and edited, and there is the delete option here at the bottom. Okay. There's full editing on all, even created documents, created SWMS. Yep.
So sorry.
That's okay. So this is the option that'll take you back to the question and answer process. If I change back, it'll bring up this page. And you can go back to the areas you want to edit. And then you can recreate it again. Okay.
So that's even after you've sent it to someone and they've acknowledged?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, we have run slightly over, but I'd like to thank Adrian and Biliana for their time this morning and everyone for attending. As I said earlier, if you've got any additional questions, you can email us through. We're happy to forward them on or put you through via phone to Adrian and the team. Again, I encourage you to get in there and have a play around. You won't break anything. But if any questions pop up, please let us know. And thanks for your time this morning.